Search teams tirelessly scoured every possible place: rivers, open fields, old wells, and abandoned buildings in the hope of finding even the smallest clue. Meanwhile, the entire nation watched with bated breath, following each new development on television and in the press. What began as a heartbreaking disappearance soon grew into something much larger. Marta's case became a national cause, shedding light on the deep flaws and inefficiencies within Spain's investigative and judicial systems. Despite the passing years, endless investigations, court hearings, and countless public demonstrations, the Del Castillo family refused to give up. Their unwavering determination turned Marta's tragedy into a catalyst for social reflection and change. Their struggle sparked nationwide discussions about justice. Today, Marta's name continues to resonate across Spain. It stands not only as a symbol of loss, but as a powerful reminder of empathy, collective action, and the unrelenting pursuit of truth even when that truth seems forever beyond reach. Dear viewers, please don't forget to like, leave a comment under the video, and subscribe to the channel so as not to miss new videos. This is very important to us. Marta del Castillo Casanueva was born on June 19, 1991, in Seville, Spain. To her loving parents, Eva Casanova and Antonio del Castillo. From an early age, Marta was known for her cheerful spirit, her dedication to family, and her kindness toward others. She attended a local high school where her friends described her as outgoing, loyal, and full of dreams for the future. At just 17 years old, her life appeared to be heading toward a bright horizon, until one evening changed everything forever. On January 24, 2009, Marta was at home chatting online with her best friend Silvia Fernandez. The two spoke about ordinary teenage things: school, plans for the weekend, and Marta's relationship with her boyfriend Miguel Carcaño. Around dusk, Marta suddenly ended the conversation. She told Silvia that she had to leave quickly because Miguel was waiting for her downstairs. Marta mentioned that they needed to talk about some issues in their relationship and promised she would tell Silvia everything when she came back. Her father happened to see her in the hallway as she was heading out. He advised her gently not to get on Miguel's motorcycle, perhaps sensing something uneasy about the situation. Marta only smiled, gave him a quick kiss on the cheek, and assured him she wouldn't be long. It was 5:30 p.m. when she left home, her family's last memory of seeing her. As the evening turned into night and Marta didn't return, concern began to grow in the household. Her parents tried to stay calm at first, assuming their daughter might have gone to visit a friend or stayed out longer than expected. But as the hours dragged on, that calm turned into deep anxiety. Eva began calling everyone she could think of: friends, classmates, and even Miguel himself. Almost everyone told her the same thing: she must be with Miguel. However, Miguel did not answer his phone. When repeated calls went unanswered, Marta's father decided to go directly to Miguel's house. He rang the doorbell several times, but no one came to the door. That night, uncertainty began turning into dread. Eventually, they reached one of Miguel's close friends, Samuel Benitez, who claimed that Miguel had dropped Marta off at his house around midnight. But it was only 11:45 p.m., and his statement immediately raised suspicions. By 2 a.m., with no sign of Marta and no credible information about her whereabouts, her family reported her missing to the authorities. None of them could have imagined that this report would mark the beginning of one of Spain's most haunting and publicized criminal cases in modern history. Even after filing the report, the family felt helpless. Hours passed with no immediate police action. By 1:30 p.m. the next day, a third report was filed out of growing desperation. Only 17 hours after the first call for help, law enforcement formally began the search for Marta, following procedural timelines that frustrated and devastated her parents. In the days following her disappearance, the Del Castillo family began organizing their own efforts. They spoke to the press, distributed posters, and reached out to the community for help. On January 27th, a press conference was held where Marta's parents publicly appealed for information. The response was overwhelming. The next day, over 2,000 people filled the streets of Seville holding signs and chanting under the emotional slogan, "We are all Marta." As the days passed, public solidarity only intensified. By February 7th, a second demonstration gathered more than 3,000 participants, all united by the hope of bringing Marta home. National television channels covered the case daily, and newspapers across Spain featured her photo on their front pages. Marta's name became a symbol of both collective sorrow and unwavering determination. After 21 days of relentless searching, on February 13, 2009, the investigation took a shocking turn. Police detained Miguel Carcaño, who was then 20 years old. During questioning, he confessed to having taken part in Marta's disappearance and claimed that he had not acted alone. Miguel identified his friend Samuel Benitez as an accomplice, alleging that Samuel had helped him afterward. Samuel initially confirmed parts of Miguel's story, though inconsistencies soon emerged. As the investigation widened, Miguel implicated additional individuals: Javier Garcia Marin, known as El Cuco, as well as his own half-brother Francisco Javier Delgado, and Delgado's girlfriend Maria Garcia. Within days, all 5 suspects were taken into custody. However, what followed was a maze of contradictions. Each suspect offered a different version of events, some retracting their statements entirely. While police continued to interrogate them, specialized teams began searching the Guadalquivir River, hoping to find definitive evidence that could lead them to Marta. On February 16th, Miguel repeated his confession before a judge, but this time he introduced new contradictions, suggesting that police pressure had led him to make false statements. His friend Samuel, on the other hand, distanced himself from the case completely, insisting he had nothing to do with Marta's disappearance. Then, on March 18th, Miguel requested to make another official statement. He dramatically changed his story again, accusing both himself and El Cuco of having harmed Marta. These inconsistencies complicated the investigation further, forcing the judge to reevaluate the search strategy. After weeks of searching the river with no success, authorities redirected their efforts to a landfill site following Miguel's shifting testimonies. Marta's father, desperate for answers, speculated that the evidence might have been destroyed elsewhere, as one of the suspect's relatives worked in a biological waste facility. Though the theory gained media traction, investigators found no solid evidence to confirm it. As the months passed after Marta del Castillo's disappearance, the investigation transformed into one of the most followed and emotionally charged criminal cases in Spain's modern history. On November 16, 2009, one of the key figures in the case, Javier Garcia Marin, better known as El Cuco, reached the maximum term permitted for preventive detention under Spanish law. The system could not keep him in a juvenile facility any longer without trial. Therefore, he was transferred to a supervised apartment under the watch of social services, awaiting his court date. 2 years later, in February 2011, El Cuco once again stood before the court, this time facing serious accusations. The charges against him included abuse and homicide, though his defense insisted there was no direct proof linking him to either. Despite the public's frustration, the legal process required evidence beyond doubt. Ultimately, El Cuco was acquitted of the gravest accusations due to insufficient evidence, but was convicted of obstruction of justice and concealment, resulting in a sentence of 2 years and 11 months. This ruling left the public divided. Some believed justice had been served within the boundaries of the law, while others saw it as a devastating failure to deliver accountability. After many procedural delays, October 17, 2011, marked the start of the major trial, the one that would bring before the court the 4 adult defendants: Miguel Carcaño, Samuel Benitez, Francisco Javier Delgado, and Maria Garcia. The courtroom was tense, packed with journalists, relatives, and members of the public who had followed the case for nearly 3 years. When Miguel Carcaño took the stand, he appeared subdued, speaking in a low tone. For the first time, he offered new details about what he claimed happened on that fateful night. He stated that during a heated argument, he had struck Marta with an ashtray, causing her death. He insisted that his earlier claims, where he had mentioned other forms of mistreatment, were false and said he had invented them out of desperation. His brother Francisco Delgado, his brother's partner Maria Garcia, and their friend Samuel Benitez all denied involvement. They declared they had no knowledge of what happened to Marta or where she might be. Each of them described Miguel as unstable and manipulative, suggesting that he was fabricating stories to shift the burden of guilt away from himself. As the proceedings advanced, the forensic police presented crucial findings. On November 22, 2011, investigators confirmed they had detected traces of Marta's DNA on Miguel's jacket. Additionally, they found a mixture of genetic material belonging to both Miguel and Maria Garcia on a roll of fabric tape discovered at the scene. Further analysis revealed DNA traces of Francisco Delgado and Maria Garcia on an extension cable that was also collected as evidence. These findings contradicted the statements of the accused, who continued to maintain their innocence. Particularly, Maria Garcia's earlier testimony, claiming she had only been at the apartment briefly in the early morning and knew nothing about the events, fell apart under scrutiny. Investigators publicly concluded that she had not told the full truth, and she was formally accused of covering up what had happened. Fingerprints added more complexity. Investigators discovered 5 distinct prints on several bottles found inside the apartment, one belonging to El Cuco. Of the 5 young people implicated, the only one without physical evidence against him was Benitez, though by then, public opinion had already judged them all harshly. Every day of the trial was a spectacle in Seville. Crowds gathered outside the courthouse shouting Marta's name and demanding justice. The atmosphere was charged with emotion. Police cordons had to be reinforced to control the crowds, yet even then, people pressed forward to catch a glimpse of the accused. When Delgado and Maria Garcia arrived, they wore balaclavas and dark sunglasses, attempting to shield their faces. But that only fueled the crowd's anger. Some onlookers shouted insults, while others tried to pull off their disguises, insisting that the public deserved to see the faces of those accused. Television crews broadcast live footage, and nearly every Spanish household was tuned in to the updates. Inside the courtroom, the prosecution demanded significant prison sentences. Decades behind bars for Miguel, and several years for the others for concealment and obstruction. Over 90 witnesses, including police officers, forensic specialists, and neighbors, testified. The evidence presented ranged from 30,000 monitored phone calls to crime scene photographs and DNA analysis from the apartment at Leon III Street, where much of the investigation had centered. Meanwhile, the media landscape surrounding the case grew increasingly complex. At one point, El Cuco's mother appeared on television with her face covered, claiming that both she and her son were innocent and had no information about Marta's whereabouts. Her televised appearance caused outrage when it was revealed that she had been paid 10,000 euros for the interview. Journalists criticized the network for profiting from the family's pain, while Marta's parents demanded that any money earned be used toward the young man's sentence or donated to charitable causes. Public opinion was sharply divided. Some argued that media exposure was necessary to keep the case alive, while others condemned the sensationalism that had overtaken the tragedy. Despite the controversy, one fact remained clear. The Del Castillo family's resilience continued to inspire thousands of people across Spain. Amidst the courtroom tension, a surprising witness took the stand. A taxi driver who claimed to have transported Francisco Delgado on the night of Marta's disappearance. The driver testified that he remembered the passenger vividly because, not long before that night, a fellow taxi driver had been killed on the job, making him extra cautious about every detail. He recalled a bald man with a beard, matching Delgado's description, carrying a plastic bag and looking unusually tense. The driver said he took him directly to Leon XIII Street, precisely the address under investigation, and that the fare had cost 8 euros. However, Delgado's defense lawyer challenged this testimony, arguing that the fare for such a short distance should have been around 5 euros at the time, not 8, a difference used to cast doubt on the witness's reliability. When Marta's parents were called to testify, the courtroom fell silent. Their words carried the weight of unimaginable pain. They explained how the years of uncertainty and heartbreak had destroyed their peace of mind. Both parents had to leave their jobs. They were under psychiatric treatment and struggling with deep depression. Marta's younger sisters, once lively and full of energy, had also suffered immensely from the absence of their beloved sibling. The family pleaded not for vengeance, but for closure, for a truth they could finally live with. Their testimony moved the entire court, and even the judges appeared visibly affected. In January 2012, the jury's verdict was announced. To the shock of many, only Miguel Carcaño was found guilty of Marta's murder, while the others were acquitted due to lack of sufficient evidence. Miguel received a sentence of 21 years and 3 months in prison and was prohibited from residing in Seville or contacting Marta's family for the next 30 years. In addition to his 21-year and 3-month prison sentence, Miguel Carcaño was ordered to pay part of the trial costs and provide financial compensation for the immense moral harm caused by Marta's disappearance and death. The court required him to pay 280,000 euros to her parents, Eva Casanova and Antonio del Castillo, and an additional 30,000 euros to each of Marta's younger sisters. The payments were meant not as material reparation, but as symbolic recognition of the unquantifiable pain endured by the family. Meanwhile, Francisco Javier Delgado, his partner Maria Garcia, and Samuel Benitez were acquitted and released. The court found there was no definitive evidence placing them at the scene of the crime at the critical moment. Their release sparked outrage across Spain. To the public, it seemed that justice had only touched the surface, leaving deeper truths buried beneath layers of doubt. The following year, the situation became even more strained. Both Delgado and Benitez, now free, filed claims demanding that Marta's family pay their share of the legal expenses incurred during the trial. The move shocked the nation and was perceived as an act of cruelty toward a family already devastated by loss. In response, Antonio del Castillo vowed to continue his fight for justice, not only within Spain, but on an international level. He publicly stated his intention to take the case to Strasbourg, home of the European Court of Human Rights, arguing that Spain's legal framework had failed his daughter. He described the system as outdated, too lenient, and unable to protect victims or their families. In December 2011, Marta's mother, Eva Casanova, wrote a heartfelt letter addressed directly to Miguel Carcaño in prison. Her words were not filled with anger, but with sorrow and a desperate plea for closure. She asked him to end what she called the torture of uncertainty, to tell the truth about what happened and where her daughter. She longed for a place to bring flowers, to sit, and to speak to her daughter, even in silence. The letter was sent to the prison where Miguel was held, but no answer ever came. The silence was deafening, prolonging the family's agony. On January 24th, 2012, exactly 3 years after Marta's disappearance, thousands of people across Spain gathered once again to honor her memory. Demonstrations took place in Seville, Madrid, Granada, and Valencia, with banners bearing messages such as "Justice for Marta" and "We have not forgotten." Candles were lit in plazas, schools held moments of silence, and citizens of all ages joined marches to show solidarity with the Del Castillo family. Inside prison, however, Miguel's life had grown increasingly isolated. Other inmates, aware of the crime he had confessed to, threatened him repeatedly. To protect him, authorities placed him in a therapeutic module where he had minimal contact with others. He refused visitors and avoided phone calls, living in a kind of self-imposed silence. Over time, Miguel became notorious for changing his version of events. In prison, he produced not 1, not 2, but 7 different confessions, each contradicting the previous one. His shifting stories exhausted investigators and lawyers alike. Several of his defense attorneys eventually resigned, citing their inability to reconcile his inconsistencies. In 2013, Miguel presented what would become his 7th version of the crime, one that dramatically altered the narrative once again. This time, he implicated someone close to him, his own half-brother, Francisco Javier Delgado. In this new account, Miguel described a heated argument over the mortgage for their shared property at Leon the 13th Street. According to him, tensions flared over a fraudulent bank loan, and the confrontation escalated into a physical altercation. At that very moment, he said, Marta intervened, attempting to calm the situation. It was during this confrontation, Miguel alleged, that his brother struck Marta. Afterward, Miguel claimed, Delgado made a mysterious phone call. Miguel insisted he did not know who his brother had contacted, but soon after, he fled the apartment in panic, leaving Marta inside the room. Despite everything, Marta's parents believed that Miguel's final version could hold some truth. They chose to forgive him, at least in part, hoping that compassion might lead him to reveal more. They even petitioned for the case to be reopened, requesting a new investigation that would focus on Delgado. But the prosecution and presiding judge rejected the idea, arguing that Miguel's credibility had been undermined by his numerous conflicting statements. Still, Antonio del Castillo refused to give up. In an act of profound humanity, he personally visited Miguel in prison. During one meeting, he offered him a deal. If Miguel helped locate Marta, the family would ensure he had a home to return to after serving his sentence. In a symbolic gesture, Antonio even purchased the apartment at Leon the 13th, promising Miguel it could one day be his if he told the truth. The search for Marta became one of the most expensive and extensive operations ever undertaken in Spain. It involved both land and underwater searches, spanning rivers, landfills, and rural properties across Andalusia. The first search took place in the Guadalquivir River, where divers spent weeks combing the murky waters. Investigators attempted to recreate the suspect's version. However, inconsistencies quickly emerged. The scenario described: 3 young men, El Cuco, Miguel, and Benitez, traveling on a single motorcycle while carrying Marta, proved physically impossible. In the reenactment, the weight caused the dummy used for simulation to fall the moment the engine started. Later, when Miguel suggested that evidence had been disposed of in a trash container, police redirected their efforts to the landfill that processed Seville's waste. Experts estimated they would have to sift through nearly 40,000 tons of refuse to find anything meaningful. For 32 days, teams of workers, aided by specialized dogs and heavy machinery, searched tirelessly. They found nothing. Each time Miguel changed his version, authorities launched new searches, on 4 in total, across different areas of Seville and neighboring towns. At one point, the Interior Minister, Alfredo Pérez Rubalcaba, had to temporarily suspend the operations because the Ministry of Economy and Finance had run out of available funds for the ongoing excavation. By April 2013, 4 years after Marta del Castillo's disappearance, the case that had shaken Spain was still open, unresolved, and emotionally raw. That spring, Carcaño introduced yet another version of events. This time, he pointed directly to his brother, Francisco Javier Delgado, accusing him of being the true culprit. He also identified a new location, a vast rural area in the municipality of La Rinconada, on the outskirts of Seville. Although his credibility had been nearly destroyed after so many conflicting versions, the gravity of his accusation was impossible to ignore. The authorities, under mounting public pressure and at the urging of Marta's family, decided to authorize a new search. Carcaño himself agreed to accompany the officers, traveling with them to the countryside under heavy guard. Once there, investigators quickly realized that Carcaño's directions were vague at best. He could not recall exact coordinates, claiming only that he remembered fields, fences, and a small path by some trees. He drew a rough sketch on paper, marking where he believed the evidence had been discarded. Despite the lack of precision, the search teams pressed on. Over several weeks, 6 different farms across La Rinconada were excavated. The team employed advanced technology, including georadar surveys, to detect any anomalies in the soil. Specialists focused on locations where earth movements had been registered in recent years, hoping to find even the slightest clue. In total, an area of 10,000 square meters was scanned and dug. Heavy machinery, forensic experts, and police officers worked side by side from sunrise to dusk. Still, As the days turned into weeks, the results remained the same. Nothing was found. The disappointment was crushing. Each failed attempt seemed to reopen the family's wounds, and the search was finally suspended once again, this time at the parents' own request. It was agreed that any new operations would pause until 2015, unless credible evidence surfaced. The public ministry, meanwhile, filed a motion requiring the defendants to jointly reimburse the Ministry of the Interior the sum of €66,329, the estimated cost of the failed searches and forensic efforts. Around this time, a mysterious figure named Oscar entered the picture. He was introduced to Rosalia Garcia, the mother of El Cuco, under the pretense of being a criminal sympathetic to her struggles. In reality, Oscar was an infiltrator, working quietly and methodically to gather information that could reignite the case. Oscar's mission was simple but emotionally complex: earn Rosalia's trust and extract any possible confession that could lead to Marta. Over time, he succeeded beyond expectations. They began to meet frequently, sometimes every 2 or 3 days, and spoke daily on the phone. Rosalia eventually trusted him completely, even giving him a set of keys to her house. Their relationship evolved into one of familiarity and emotional dependence. They shared confidences, took long walks by the beach, and exchanged stories about life, guilt, and the weight of secrets. Oscar even fabricated plans about leaving Spain together, telling her that once her son's legal troubles were over, they would start fresh somewhere in Eastern Europe. For 2.5 years, Oscar collected an extraordinary archive of material, more than 600 hours of recorded conversations between Rosalia, her social circle, and occasionally El Cuco himself. During this time, El Cuco had already received permission for temporary release from prison. On one occasion, while talking to Oscar, he made an unguarded remark. Oscar asked casually, "Do you think the police are still following you?" Without hesitation, El Cuco replied, "Of course they are. They'll keep watching me until they find out where we left Marta." Realizing what he had just admitted, he immediately backtracked, insisting he had meant something else, that he hadn't been involved at all. Oscar, maintaining his composure, pretended not to notice the slip and continued the conversation as if nothing significant had happened. In other recordings, El Cuco could be heard mocking investigators, joking about how they would never find the body, while his mother, Rosalia, criticized the police for not tracking her phone calls. The tone of those exchanges painted a chilling portrait of indifference and arrogance. Yet despite Oscar's dedication, the 600 hours of audio never made it into court proceedings. Bureaucratic red tape and procedural disputes prevented the recordings from being officially admitted as evidence. For years, they remained in legal limbo, ignored, dismissed, and nearly forgotten. It wasn't until 2022, a full 13 years after Marta's disappearance, that Oscar's work finally bore fruit. By then, Spain had changed. Laws had evolved, public opinion had matured, and the demand for justice in cold cases had grown stronger. On May 26, 2022, the case re-entered the courts. Crowds gathered once again outside the courthouse in Seville. Neighbors, supporters, and journalists surrounded the building, eager to stand by Marta's family on this long-awaited day. Many had followed the case since 2009. Others were too young to remember the initial events, but had learned about Marta through documentaries and social campaigns. As proceedings began, Rosalia and her son, El Cuco, arrived under heavy police protection. The pair attempted to conceal their identities. El Cuco wore a large hoodie, a balaclava, dark sunglasses, and gloves, while Rosalia covered herself with a mask, headscarf, and tinted glasses. Despite their efforts, the crowd recognized them instantly. Years earlier, in 2011, both El Cuco and his mother had given statements denying any involvement in Marta's disappearance. El Cuco had claimed he was not at the Leon 13th Street apartment that night. According to him, he was with friends until 11:30 p.m., then returned home, where he supposedly ran into his mother's partner taking out the garbage. After that brief exchange, He said he went inside and stayed there the rest of the night. Rosalia's story mirrored her son's, but with slightly different details. She stated that she and her partner had gone out for drinks around 11:30 p.m. and didn't return home until 1:30 a.m. on January 25th, when she found her son already asleep. However, during new interrogations, inconsistencies emerged. El Cuco eventually confessed that on the night of January 24th, 2009, Carcaño had called him, asking for help after something terrible had happened. Along with Samuel Benitez, El Cuco admitted to using his mother's car to drive to Leon Durthurin Street, where Delgado was also present. Meanwhile, Rosalia was reportedly still at a bar that night, staying out until 4:30 a.m. When she finally returned home, her son was not there. When the investigation revisited these contradictions, both Rosalia Garcia and her son were charged with perjury for lying under oath and obstructing justice in a case that had already consumed over a decade of the Spanish judicial system's time and resources. Eventually, both accepted their guilt, acknowledging that they had misled the investigation. The courtroom atmosphere was solemn. Marta's parents attended the hearings, clinging to a small hope that perhaps this time, some truth would finally emerge. However, when the trial began, the judge unexpectedly suspended the scheduled witness statements, including the highly anticipated testimony from Miguel Carcaño himself. The decision left Marta's family devastated. They had hoped that Miguel, after all these years, might finally reveal the location of their daughter. On June 9th, 2022, the long and exhausting legal process against Javier Garcia Marin, better known as El Cuco, and his mother, Rosalia Garcia, finally concluded. The court found both guilty of perjury, lying under oath and obstructing the course of justice, for providing false statements years earlier during the investigation into Marta's disappearance. The judge sentenced them to 2.5 years in prison, alongside a fine of 1,440 euros each. Additionally, they were ordered to pay 30,000 euros in civil damages to Marta's parents, Eva Casanova and Antonio del Castillo. But for Marta's family, no financial penalty could ever hold meaning. Money, as Antonio said outside the courthouse, cannot buy truth, nor bring our daughter home. Later that same year, in an unexpected move, the investigative judge overseeing the case authorized a new line of inquiry. He approved a request to have a digital forensic expert analyze the mobile phones of both Miguel Carcaño and Marta del Castillo. For Marta's parents, this represented a final glimmer of hope. Perhaps technology, which had advanced significantly since 2009, could uncover what years of human searching could not. However, the authorization came with strict limitations. The judge did not allow the same analysis to be carried out on the phones of the other individuals involved, Delgado, Benitez, or El Cuco, on the grounds that no new or direct evidence existed linking them to fresh leads. For the Del Castillo family, this restriction felt like another door closing. Still, they clung to the idea that even one device could hold a clue, a signal, a timestamp, or a forgotten message that could change everything. When officials approached Miguel Carcaño to request his consent to access his phone, he immediately agreed. In fact, he encouraged it. According to his own words, he was certain that the examination would prove his brother's guilt once and for all. But the investigation's primary objective was not to reopen the criminal charges. It was to locate Marta, to find out where she was, not necessarily who was most responsible. Despite that, the new analysis came to nothing. The forensic expert, though authorized, never submitted his final report. In November 2022, the Civil Court of Seville issued its final decision on the matter. The court formally closed the separate investigation dedicated to locating Marta, declaring that the statutory period for legal inquiry had expired.